Welcome to Truthscript Tuesday evening. It is a beautiful, wonderful evening where I am, and hopefully there's not a cat fight this time. There was not a Truthscript Tuesday last Tuesday because I welcomed my first child into the world just a few days before that, and I couldn't get it together. And so we have double the amount of articles to go over. We have 6 articles, and all really good, all really relevant, and great articles to talk about on varying topics. Before we get there, though, I want to remind everyone that Truthscript is a 501c3. If you want to support the mission of Truthscript, just go to truthscript.com. You can scroll down to the bottom, and there is a donate tab there. There's also a publish tab if you want to publish for Truthscript. If you're a writer and you want a place to publish some of your stuff, if it's Christian related and if it matches our criteria, check it out. I also want to let you know that we have our conference media set up on the YouTube channel. You can go listen to some of the sessions from the Stand Firm conference that recently took place in Idaho. And I was a speaker there. We also had Matt Slick and Danny Steinmeier, one of our board members. And on that note, I should say, please pray for us. We're having a board meeting tomorrow, and we have a lot of things to talk about, including the Church Finder. I know I'm just flying through these announcements, but there's a bunch of them. The Church Finder, if you go to the top of truthscript.com and click on that, there is still a form to fill out if you would like to submit your church as a potential church for our Church Finder map. That means it'll get more visibility. People who go to the Truthscript website looking for a solid church that's not woke are going to find your church. And there's all sorts of different things you can fill out for denominational preferences. Put the website in there, put all the information, and people will find it. Obviously, you need to agree with the statement of faith that Truthscript provides, which you can also find on the website in the About Us section at the bottom. But we are going to launch this pretty soon. Like we're going to actually, it's populated already with a number of churches. We would like more, but we're going to launch it. So there's going to be a map there very soon. Let's see what else. I think we're close to uploading some of the conference sessions from the Be Not Conformed conference, which took place in Wisconsin over a month ago. And that was also a great time. So be looking out for that on the YouTube channel. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. That definitely helps us. Even if you don't listen to this on YouTube, if you listen on iTunes or somewhere else, subscribing to the Truthscript YouTube channel definitely helps us. Give us a like. If there's an article that you like, please share it. You can also, I know I'm giving you so much. I don't usually give you this much, but I think that we have a number of new Truthscript readers. I just keep seeing in my email people subscribing to the Truthscript readership there. So if you are someone who's listening or watching and you haven't done that yet, there's a subscribe button on the top right hand corner of truthscript.com, and you can subscribe to the email list. We'll let you know when we have new articles that are posted. And last but not least, the Fundamentals Conference is coming up, and I want to push this hard because this is a great time. Fundamentalsconference.com is another way that you can find it, but you can also go to truthscript.com and find it there. And this is a conference that I've been really running this for the last few years. I think this would be our 3rd time doing it, and it's a men's conference. It's for men. Here's just some pictures from it from previous years. We have a great time at Camp of the Woods in Speculator, New York. The scenery is amazing. We were just before peak last time, so I decided to move it up to September 27th through 29th, which, should be, it depends on the weather, but it should be peak fall in the Adirondack Mountains, which are just stunning. And we have a great time in the outdoors. I bring my kayak. It's a tandem kayak. I let people use it. Other people bring their fishing boats. We go hiking. There's lots of stuff to do there. And the rates are there as well. They're very reasonable. In fact, we don't make any profit at all off of this. This is really just what the camp charges for you to come, and you get really good food. It's people who have gone can tell you, and good accommodations. We have an option this year. If you want single occupancy, meaning your own room, you can pay a little more. But those are the rates. And so check it out. It's fundamentalsconference.com. Okay. Now that we've talked about all of that, let's talk about some of the articles on the Truthscript website. I'm excited to go through some of these because I think they're just so good. We have some great writers on truthscript.com and very grateful for them. The first article is a little different than maybe the articles you would find on your standard run-of-the-mill Christian website. We get into some topics that would probably be forbidden there, but I think they're important. And Jason Mills thought they were important, who wrote this article called Greater Idaho, the Need for Antithesis. And he says there is a particular blindness that plagues many Christians when recognizing what's at stake in the current political climate. Going along to get along and hoping for the best is not a winning strategy. And have you noticed there's a lot of Christians doing that? There's a lot of Christians who think if we just keep our head down, keep doing your job, things are just going to get better. I don't know how they think that. Maybe if Trump gets in, that things will get better. Even if Trump gets in, remember his first term, what happened during that time? Culture, society, the attacks on just general morality got worse and worse. They didn't get better. I mean, I'm not saying that it wouldn't have been worse with a Democrat president. Trump did some good things, but, we can't depend on that to be, what'll get us out of the mess that we're in. Christians have become far too hospitable to the progressive agenda. And so this is an article calling for what would be considered now unconventional approaches to politics. Now, this is very quintessentially American, but this is something that you're not really allowed to talk about or think. And so he talks about this. I think it's probably a pretty good idea, the Greater Idaho Project. And I've talked about this on Conversations That Matter and other podcasts that I host. And he talks about just what Oregon is like. Oregon's a microcosm of what is occurring all over the nation. You have Portland, which is home to approximately 47% of Oregon's voters. So Portland controls the rest of the state, but it covers a mere 3,682 of Oregon's 95,962 square miles, less than 4% of its landmass. And this is happening in New York. To be honest with you, look at an election map of California. It's the same thing. These deep blue states, oftentimes you'll look at them on a map and the majority of the state is red. I mean, there's some exceptions, but look, Oregon is very similar to what's happening in a lot of other places. There's gerrymandering that's going on that because the Democrats are in charge, they can do this kind of thing to keep their majorities. And so he just says it's a losing strategy, essentially, being in Oregon. And if you're in Eastern Oregon, the high desert, which is a semi-arid climate, much like Idaho, has cultural similarities also to Idaho. And you feel more of a kinship with them and a relationship and proximity than you do to those on the western part of the state. So he goes into some of this and just all the cultural differences, which you can probably imagine, and how COVID showed these differences very severely, and how people in the eastern part of Oregon, they want out. They want to join Idaho. They want to be part of a state that actually creates policies that will benefit them and reflects their understanding, their values, the future that they have for their people. So what's the solution here? And this, I should say, this is, primarily composed of traditional people, but many Christians are in that section of Oregon. And they're at the mercy of really what amounts to pagans who live in the western side of the state. And so the localist approach, of course, is to try to figure out a way to break those connections to that section of the state and maybe even form connections to more conservative states like Idaho. And so he makes the case, and I'm not going to make it all for you in this particular podcast, but I would say check it out if you're interested in this. If you live in these states, then this is an article you definitely want to check out because he makes the case in detail for why this is important and the path they're taking. They're going to the counties. They're thinking locally, and they're putting on the ballot in these county elections referendums to figure out where is the population in this county. Do they want to break free and join Idaho? And the support seems to be there for that. And this is all obviously a recipe for peace, for de-escalating political tension. This isn't just something to do because, and it's going to cause a war, and this is, a violent move, and we need to do it and grit our teeth and do it because the future for our children matter. There's times for that. This is actually, though, not that. This is, let's just have peace. You go our separate ways, and you live your vision, we'll live ours, and leave each other alone. So he talks about how this is perfectly in line with the Constitution. It doesn't contradict anything. And it's one of many movements that can be found in blue or purple states in Pennsylvania, Illinois, Virginia, New Mexico, and Colorado, which have red counties bordering a red state. And I could probably add New York to that list. Now, why should Christians care about any of this? This sounds unconventional. It sounds scary, right? Doesn't it? Because we like the United States map the way it is. We like each state having its specific borders, and you change any of that up, and that's different than it was when we were kids. I don't know. Well, Being a faithful Christian requires more, but never less than the broad scattering of our gospel seed. Watering, fertilizing, and carefully pruning are also vital components of our Christian mandate. And this demands a high level of commitment from our local communities and churches that often have political implications. So the state needs Christianity. Christians provide an essential anchor for politics and culture. Christianity is a statement regarding the ultimate source of law and authority. And if Christians do not put forward this fact, some of our other religion of the state will gain sway. But Christians can't accept the presuppositions of liberal policies or the myth of political neutrality. That's the dilemma. To do so is a sure path leading to destruction because liberal practice and policy will increasingly produce principle. And when that happens, there will be no room for escape. So this is a survival mechanism. This is you may think it's drastic. You may think it's, and in one sense it is. I mean, this is a last resort. You don't want to do this kind of thing, but if you can't get along, if you can't live under these policies, you're going to be looking for the exit door. What's the escape hatch? And this is a potential escape hatch. So the strength of the Greater Idaho and other like-minded movements is the emphasis on localism. And you can do that even if the state does not politically split. You can still focus on the local and control zoning and even just having sheriffs in control. That made such a difference during COVID. There's a lot of things you can do. And so that kind of sense is important to have. G.K. Chesterton said, keep your politicians near enough to kick them. So and this is a principle, we have in the apportionment of representatives at the initiation of this republic, where, I don't remember the exact number, but you had representatives who actually represented you. The scale was was small enough that you probably knew who they were and you could access them. And now that's just impossible. And so smaller population centers governing themselves creates more accountability. Article goes on, and I'm just going to skip to the conclusion here. It's sobering to remember that there is nothing more local than our families. Scripture teaches that God gives parents the responsibility to care for, raise, protect, and educate their children, and this ought to be done without the interference of the state. As Christians, we should support political movements that seek to preserve a social and legislative culture that honors and strengthens this mandate. And that's what the Greater Idaho movement is hoping and intending to do. So check it out. That's something that, I'm really glad that Jason Mills had the opportunity to publish this with Truthscript, because we need to get this out. And Christians do need to understand that there are potential escape hatches from the dilemmas we're in. And oftentimes some of these more unconventional ones aren't taken as seriously because they're unconventional. But look, a lot of things can happen. And this is one of the things, 2020 didn't teach us anything else, or even 2016 with the election of Donald Trump. Then, learn the lesson now that a lot of things can happen, surprising things. And so if this is something you're interested in, if you live in these states, I would say contact the Greater Idaho Project. I'm sure it's you can be found with an easy search online. Well, we are streaming. Jennifer says good day. It's good night where I am. I don't know where Jennifer is. If you are streaming along with us, feel free to drop a message in. Let us know that you're listening. And if you have a question, by all means, or a comment, let me know as we go through this. The next article is by Matthew Pearson. Matthew Pearson, who wrote a book review, Honor Thy Fathers. And this is a great book. I actually endorse this book. My name's on, I think, the back of it, where I give my little blurb. And this is by Zachary Garris. He's a reverend in the Presbyterian Church in America. And this is a great book, really just a treasure trove of quotes. That's how I looked at it, of Reformed thinkers and Protestant theologians who have talked about this understanding of male headship and what the limitations are to, we would think of it now as the egalitarian debate, but the limitations to women participating in roles that are designed for men, essentially. And so, a very controversial subject in this day and age, but this is a really good book. And so, and I think it's also a really good review. And if you don't have time to look at the book, check out the review on Truthscript. Matthew says that Garris begins his work by opening with a definition of feminism. According to Garris, feminism is, quote, an ideology that seeks to flatten the differences between men and women, particularly in the home, the church, and the civil government. The goal of feminism is for women to become more like men, especially by trading babies and homemaking for careers outside the home. And in light of this definition, Garris lays out his general thesis, and here it is. Quote, this book seeks to contrast modern feminism, including that found in the church with the theology of Protestant reformers and their theological successors, the Reformed Orthodox. Many Western churches have abandoned the views of these influential people, and it's to their own peril. They've adopted a feminist culture, and some unknowingly. They don't even realize they're doing it. And so Garris really wants to set the record straight and get back to, I think, what was a rich and healthy tradition. So the summary in part 1 of the book is that Garris is, because it's broken into 2 parts, is that he's giving a theological retrieval of our Reformed fathers, meaning he's going to give you information about different people like John Calvin and John Knox and William Perkins, William Gouge, and Sturbitus Voitis. I'm probably not even saying that one right. And many from the Westminster Assembly. So these older guys who have talked about this issue, and he recovers what they've said so that we can read it today, because you're not going to find this. You're not even going to find a review for this book probably on most Christian websites. This is something that is forbidden. So this is the kind of thing that needs to be exposed because, again, just like the last article, these are solutions to the dilemmas we're in, and they're not hard to find. They're right there. So theological retrieval, and he does it well. Garris is a great historian, despite the fact I don't think Garris has a history degree, if I'm not mistaken. I hope I didn't I didn't say that wrongly. I'm pretty sure he's got a law degree and a seminary degree, but he does a great job with the historical retrieval. Part 2 of the work seeks to show the deep rot of feminism in modern ecclesiastical institutions. And he cites B.B. Warfield, Herman Bavinck, and Charles Hodge. And he talks about the dangers, believe it or not, of complementarianism and the creeping in of female deacons in conservative denominations and the practice of many permitting women to lead in public prayer during worship. And, in some denominations, deacons have a more, this is kind of a variable thing, a more influential role than in others. And so this becomes a problem when they have an influential role and then they have a leadership role, really, and then females take on that role. So the general assessment that Matthew has is that this is an excellent book. You should get it. It's actually a short book, which I appreciate too. This isn't something that's a tome. So check it out. Get any of Garris's books. His book, Masculine Christianity, is also good. Check it out and give Garris some support. The next article is by Jonah Hewer, and it's called Courage, Caution, and Anonymity. And, I'm going to go through this a little more. I actually said, I think Jonah and I interacted a little bit on social media. I said, I might, this is a great article to read, think through. I may have some differences myself. And this podcast is not really about John Harris's views, but since I'm the one hosting the podcast, I might interject a little bit here and there, but I support the article. I think it's great, but I told him, I might write something a little different, maybe a little critique. So we'll see. But here's what he says. The Christian faith and ethics are taboo in our worldly culture. For those who want to express Christian beliefs in this culture, anonymity may seem like an attractive option, right? Because here's the thing, you're risking a lot when you start saying, let's say you don't agree with homosexuality, right? That could get you fired. That could get you in trouble. So why not just be an anonymous person? Why not use another name? Go right under a different name. And so people don't know exactly who you are and they can't punish you or your family, right? So that's an attractive thing because you can say anything you want, right? And now supposedly people get doxxed. That's the danger. But the freedom to speak without negative consequences is appealing. But I think there's more for Christians to consider before we decide to trade in our names and faces for pseudonyms and anime profile pictures. This is my opinion, but can we not do the anime profile pictures, please? Maybe that's more of a Gen Z thing and I'm showing my age. I don't know, but 2 types of anonymity. So there are 2 ways to practice anonymity. The type that immediately comes to mind is the online anons. That would be like on Twitter or Facebook when you have an internet persona or pseudonym that you can use to publish your thoughts. So you can tweet edgy things if you want, and you don't have to have the anxiety that comes with people canceling you for it. The second type is what he calls in-person anonymity. In-person anonymity is the act of masking your beliefs in a hostile or uncertain setting. For example, a person practicing in-person anonymity might avoid conversations about the Bible or certain political topics. If such topics do come up, this person might listen and nod without contributing to the conversation. So they don't have a neutral position, but they make it look like they do. And, this is, man, I'm trying to think, like, this is like being in the closet for being a Christian. Like, you're just going to stay in there and not let anyone know because you don't want to suffer the consequences. So anyway, the author says, I'm just one man. I have one set of beliefs, one set of relationships, and one set of standards by which I try to live. Anonymity sets up a bizarre dynamic of two people in one, each with a different set of ideas and standards. My online persona can make statements I would never make in real life. I might refuse to share a thought at work that I would say without hesitation at home. To me, this seems like a confusing way to live. We are not meant to live as two people. Now, one thing I would say to this is, well, let me wait, and let's talk about this more, because the article goes on actually quite a bit and makes some really good points. So I'm going to save my thought. Cultivating courage. With all the stories we've seen of people being mocked, fired, doxxed, threatened, and otherwise persecuted for telling truths that are offensive to the modern secularists, I think we can all acknowledge that telling the truth can be risky. Even so, anonymity is a flawed solution. We may be able to avoid direct backlash under the cover of a pseudonym for a little while, but eventually we will all be faced with circumstances where we have only two options. And he's right about this. Either we will obey God and confess truth, or we will hide from the truth like Peter did when he denied Christ. So, Caesar's going to come with the incense. You're going to have to pinch it. And I've said this for a while. Eventually, it's not going to be an option. You're going to have to celebrate some of these pagan celebrations. It's going to come to that. Like, if the people who are in charge now remain in charge, they're going to make you like it. And if you don't, if you just say, I'm out, I don't want to participate, I'm not saying I'm against it, I just don't want to participate, that will be the sign that you actually are against it. That day's coming. And so you won't have the option of anonymity. And he's right. So we got to be prepared for that. But we need courage, essentially. And we need to be faithful and trust God. And I think that's very true. And there's a lot of lack of that. And I will agree with him on that. More could be said, but I'm skimming through this. So he says, avoiding discouraging others is another thing. There's an implicit message underneath anonymous statements. No matter how boldly or beautifully put, the speaker is saying, I don't want to be associated publicly with what I just said because I'm afraid of being mistreated for it. And that's discouraging, because if I care enough about the opinions and insights of these individuals, but they aren't even willing to claim their views as their own, how am I supposed to apply what I've learned from them? If I take their implicit message to heart, I take whatever is valuable from their work and hide it under a bushel. Whatever truth or call to action the speaker is trying to deliver will terminate in my mind. If I share it at all, it will only be with those who I confident or already agree. Anonymity is a statement in and of itself. And then, so there's a discouraging element to this, and then endeavoring not to squander gospel opportunities. If you're afraid of drawing negative attention from the world, the last thing you want to do is talk about sin. And you have to, right? You have to, right? That's the law brings the conviction, and the conviction is what drives people to the cross. And the cross is what saves them, ensuring they can be in a right relationship with God and escape that sin and spend eternity with him, right? So you have to start the process somewhere. Christians have a couple of options when this happens. Either we can be silent, trying not to assent to the prevailing view while also not objecting, or we can look for an opening to tell the truth about sin. And that's a good thing, I think. If you have an opportunity to share about the truth of Christ, share, like, let's bring the example up of homosexuality again. And you say, look, Jesus doesn't agree with that, so I don't agree with that, and I can't assent to this. Then that creates the opportunity for you to share more, because people might be curious about it. And it might be that law might be the thing that convicts. There's one main objection I anticipate receiving that goes like this. Yes, we need to be prepared to suffer persecution, but that doesn't mean we have to seek it out. And he says, I can understand how what I've said so far could be interpreted as a kamikaze attitude, but that's not what I'm saying. I absolutely affirm the obligation of Christians to exercise prudence. I try to exercise it myself. For example, I don't add coworkers on social media, and I don't promote my Substack to them. I don't go out of my way to drench the workplace in social gasoline. That's really good. All I try to do is respond to conversations as they naturally occur, with courage and boldness. At the same time, if my employer Googles my name, they're going to find things that I've said about homosexuality, transgenderism, colonization, and other taboo subjects that might make me unappealing. And I hope that my Christian brothers who read this will spend time in prayer and contemplation before choosing to practice anonymity. So let me just say one thing. And Jonah, by the way, Jonah is an electrical worker in Minnesota where he lives with his wife and daughter. I've said before, the thing about Truthscript, one of the great strengths is there are these great writers out there. And sometimes they have perspectives. I would rather hear from an electrical worker in Minnesota on this topic than I probably would from the vast majority of pastors who sit in an office and aren't subject they're subject to pressures for sure, but not the same kind of pressures that someone who's a blue collar worker is subjected to, or someone on the workforce in general. They're somewhat cushioned oftentimes from those things. They don't have the cancel culture after them because they can study independently the Bible. And so I'm not knocking pastors at all, of course, but I really appreciate the fact that this article is written by someone who has skin in the game. So what I would say is there's a lot of good points to chew on, and I would encourage you to chew on it if you're an Anon. You may not want to be. One of the things that I discovered in my personal life years ago, because I used it wasn't a pseudonym, it was actually a real name, but it was a family name, to write something that I was told by people who I respected, like, you can't write that. It's politically incorrect in academia. If you want a job in academia, don't put it out there under your name. And so I used a relative's name. And I learned, and I got doxxed. Well, I basically doxed myself. Like, I couldn't really promote it without admitting, like, I wrote this. So there's so many clues out online that I put there, but people claim to have doxed me when really the information was already kind of out there. But I realized, I learned a lesson in all that. Like, it's hard to hide on the internet anyway. So that's one of my just basic things is, like, don't say something even under an anonymous account that you wouldn't say, you can't stand by, right? I'm open to the fact that there may be times to use anonymity. And I think we do something similar to this this is just kind of my counter to it, I guess, or my food for thought. We do something to this in different situations anyway. It's not like there's two versions of me when I am in a situation with coworkers, let's say, which, I've been on the workforce for years with godless coworkers, right? I might act a certain way around them, not compromising my beliefs, but I might not, I might keep my nose to the grindstone more. I'm not there to be preachy with them, right? I might behave in a certain way towards them. And of course I do preach, but, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not, I'm there to fulfill an objective. I'm there to complete a job. I have to work with them. And hopefully, I do drop some things here and there, and we have conversations about the Lord, and the witnessing takes place. And it did when I was working, but it's different than the way I'm going to act with my family. When I'm with people who know where I'm coming from, understand what I believe, I can be more free to share things. And it's not like there's two Johns, right? It's just that prudence dictates I'm going to act different around different people, not in a hypocritical way, not in a way that I won't stand behind if I'm caught on camera or something. I'm not changing the message, not contradicting myself. It's just the needs of the moment are different. And I think that's part of how we manage our speech. And there are times of political danger where Federalist Papers are a good example of this, where you might, it might be prudent to hide the message that you're advocating, or hide who it's coming from, to avoid consequences, not to you, but to your family. There may be an argument in certain cases, but I think the overall critique here is spot on. This can be overused, and this can be something where you're just posting stuff you would never stand behind, crass stuff, mean stuff, sometimes sinful stuff, and that is never a good thing. So don't use anonymity as a cover for things like sin. So, oh, wow. Jennifer's in Australia, midday in Australia. And it's evening in Albuquerque. Ray says hello as well. Hello, Ray. Good to have you on the evening here of the Truthscript Tuesday. Well, we have more articles to get to. And so some good food for thought. Running the Race of Faith, Seth Brickley. Seth is a great pastor friend who's written many. I love the background of this. This looks like the Grand Tetons, and it's a jogger running towards the Grand Tetons. What a place to be. Anyway, Seth does a great job writing. He says, in my earliest years, I discovered that the Lord had blessed me with the gift of putting one foot in front of the other. So Seth is a runner, for those who don't know, and he's a good runner from what I can tell. He's just such a humble guy too. Seth, I got to say this about Seth. Seth is the first guy I think I've ever met that coasted a whole conference, did all the legwork. He's the pastor, the church was the venue, and he didn't even give himself a place to speak. and that's who Seth is. Like, Seth is just, he could be so accomplished in something, and he's not going to tell you. And so I guess he is telling us, at least he's not telling you how good he was. I'll put it that way. He's telling you he is a runner, though. And distance running is difficult. You got to train for it. He talks about some of the training he went through, and it's not easy. And he would run 2 hard miles, walk a lap, and then run 2 hard miles again in speed training. And he would run 6 hundreds on the track and a mile pace. I mean, he talks about all the man, it just makes me exhausted reading through what he does. He talks about how this is a sport that's as old as time. That though in the current iteration of the Olympic Games, which began in 1896, the games were occurring at the time. There were games occurring at the time the Bible was written. The first Olympics were held in Olympia, Greece in 776 BC and continued until about 393 AD. Just like in the modern Olympics, the sport of running was front and center. So he talks about Paul saying that every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wealth, but we imperishable. And what's he talking about? Running the race. This is an analogy that Paul uses. So Paul's calling is similar to running. The Christian walk is similar to running. The Christian walk is in the ways of the Lord. Each person is different and every calling is unique. Every Christian's life is a book, one meant to tell a story about the triumphant life lived to the glory of God. And Paul was given a clear call by God to reach the Gentiles. And when he went to Jerusalem, he was encouraged that his efforts to reach them were not contradicted by the leaders there, namely Peter, James, and John. Their approval meant his efforts had not been wasted, nor would they be going forward. Both Paul and the apostles understood the race that Paul was called to run. So he had a task. God had prepared for him. And the challenge is God has something for you too. Are you running that race? Are you, like Paul, running the race that God has given you, completing those tasks and training? It takes training. It takes work. It takes endurance. Now, the danger is running in vain. Running in vain. It's immensely important to make sure that each of us is fulfilling the ministry call that the Lord has given us and to have the support of other faithful Christians who help prosper the Lord's labor through us. Sometimes Christians can run in vain, though, because they have deviated from what the Lord wants. And Galatians 5 says, "You're running well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth?" How relevant this is to our day as we think about how those Christians who have adopted the world's thinking on issues like social justice, CRT, homosexuality, and the things the world celebrates. You were running the race well. What happened? What happened? And running without regret, holding fast to the word of life so that in the day of Christ I may be proud, Paul says in Philippians, that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. Running without regret. 1 Corinthians 15, there's so many verses, aren't there, on this? I worked harder, Paul says, than any of them, though it was not I, but the grace of God that is with me. I mean, it's hard, and there's so much joy and so much blessing in the Christian life, but there's endurance. It's hard work. It really is. And I love that Footprints poem, but you know what? The Footprints poem is Jesus isn't just going to carry you. He's going to get you to a point where you're going to be walking again and running. That's what the Christian life is. It's not Jesus take the wheel. Since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Hebrews 12:1. There's so many verses about this, right? He who calls you is faithful. He will surely do it. The Lord is going to help you. He's going to train you. He's going to prepare you. Seth closes with a story of a race that he ran in Duluth, Minnesota, and that he could see the finish line, and being able to see that 800 meters to the end caused him to fix his eyes, speed up, and give everything he had. My fastest quarter mile of the race was the last one. And that's how it ought to be for us. So at the end, we can say, the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Henceforth, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. All right, really good inspirational. I love these kind of articles from Seth Brickley. And then the antidote against burnout. The Antidote Against Burnout by Jonas Lejanen. And this was actually originally published at Banner of Truth. So Truthscript is publishing it now, but it was originally published at Banner of Truth in June of 2023. Burnout is something that can affect all of us. But in ministry, burnout is very common because, I don't even know how to. I grew up in a pastor's home, but it's hard for me to even explain to people who aren't in that. It's just, you're on call all the time. And you're motivated, and it's the Lord's work. It's your ministry and your job, and it's important. And people have crises all the time, and so you can just easily, the workload's there. You can easily just burn yourself out. And so he talks about this reality. And ministers are a target of the devil. The devil wants to burn you out. This is one of the things, by the way, one of the things you can do as a member of your church is just have a good marriage, live a good life, raise your kids well, do your devotional time, just live that life. You know why? Because and obviously if you have problems, the pastor's there for you. But if you're stable, you're one less person the pastor has to spend exorbitant amounts of time with to try to get back on the track if you're already on the track. That's actually something you can do for your pastor besides praying for him. So he talks about, he doesn't say that, I'm saying that, but understanding the suffering. Paul knew that his sufferings were from the world, the flesh, and the devil, but his hope was in the perfect providence of God. So he says in 2 Corinthians 1, for just as the sufferings of Christ are ours in abundance, so also are our comfort in abundance through Christ. So the Lord Jesus Christ was sought to be destroyed from the womb to his death on the cross. He faced vile accusations. All the trials Jesus went through. And Paul had made peace with the fact that in the wisdom of God, he would face the same. So this is just a dose of reality. You're getting into ministry. You're following in the footsteps of Christ. And even if you're not a pastor, you're following the footsteps of Christ. If you're a believer, there is going to be some hardship. And this really flows with what we just talked about from Seth Brickley. It's the race. It's, there's endurance, there's hardship, there's things to jump over, there's barriers, there's times when it's going to be hot outside, there's times where you're thirsty and you got to push. And it doesn't mean that there's not peace. It doesn't mean God doesn't give you rest and he takes the burden of your sin and you live in a way that you run light. You're running with yourself and not with a big backpack back there. And you actually have the freedom to run, which is different than the world. They can't, right? They can't even put one foot in front of the other. They're weighed down by their sin. But you're still running. It's still work. The real reason for burnout, we often say and sing that Christ is worthy. But what does this look like in pastoral ministry? He says, I'm convinced that it means perseverance. Demas deserted Paul and left the faith because he never really grasped this. I believe that the primary cause of burnout is the problem of the heart. Anyone who does ministry in the way Christ appointed will have the perfect excuse to quit. And I've seen this many times. And many times, wives of pastors will be the ones initiating this kind of thing. I'm just saying that from experience. Everyone has their limit, and you can only take so much, right? That's true. Maybe you were thinking the slander, the unreasonableness, the ingratitude were too much. I'm no stranger to this. I'm not better than anyone else. But behind these words, what are we really saying? We're saying that Christ was not worthy of our pain. This is how someone who never should have entered the ministry will persist in thinking. The Bible promises that the work of the gospel will be painful, and what grounds do we have to expect something else? And the remedies. What's the remedy? I'm like, John, man, that doesn't give me a lot of hope. What's the remedy? We know that life built on the sufficiency of Christ is a necessary qualification for pastoral ministry. Paul endured real pain because Christ was worth it. In his weakness, he was strong. The Lord stood by him when no one else would, and we must look to him and go to him for that. So God does offer a grace and a strength to do the things that he has called us to do. Paul asked for prayers to force that strength. And do we ask for prayers? Do we rely on him? Prayer should not, however, be seen as a solution to remove suffering. The Bible does not give us the right to pray against the providence of God. As John Flavel wrote, complain to God, you may, but complain about God, you may not. We can't pray against receiving the sufferings of Christ. These sufferings are God's means of sanctification. And so this is like James says, the trials that are going to produce that endurance and perfection or completeness. And so I would just add one thing to this and say, there are times, like I said, I grew up in a pastoral household. There are times to put in some guardrails, to make some boundaries, so that because you got to identify, there are things God wants you to do. There's also things the devil puts in your way. And some people can waste your time, frankly. They may not even be interested in repentance, but they can spend a whole afternoon with you. And that's an afternoon as a pastor you couldn't spend encouraging someone else. And so you have to have a lot of wisdom and discernment and put up boundaries as well. There is such a thing as unnecessary burnout because you're busy doing things that God hasn't called you to do. So you want to make sure you're in the lane. You make sure this is what God wants me to do. These are the things God has called me to do. And I'm going to do them. And if it's hard, it's hard. God will give me strength. And what are some of the things God also gives you, though, right? Besides, if you're a pastor, besides quote unquote ministry, well, your family's your ministry, right? He wants you to be involved in your community and to know the people that are around you so that you have a good reputation with them, you need to be involved in other things too. It can't swallow up your entire life. And so you have to have an order of priorities, and that creates those boundaries too and orders your life. So I would add that as well. All right. So Ray says, this summary moves fast. I better start reading the articles ahead of time so I can better engage. Yeah, maybe I should slow it down a little bit. And some people, believe it or not, listen to this at 2 speed. Can you imagine that? They'll listen to my summaries at 2 speed and they somehow get something out of that. I think I'm already talking in Ben Shapiro 2 speed mode already. But anyway, those are the articles on the Truthscript website. We had 6 to go over. So I was moving fast because we've already been at it for 40 minutes. But this is if you're in the United States, obviously some of you are in other countries, but if you're in the United States, this is the week of July 4th. I hope you have a wonderful Independence Day. If you're coming to my house, I got some ribs, I got some brisket, I got some pulled pork. It's all ready to go. I mean, I'm going to season it tomorrow. And I'm sorry if you don't live close, but that's what I'm doing. So it's going to be a good time. And I'm enjoying my little daughter who just was born now a week and a half ago. Little Anna Elizabeth is her name. And please pray for Truthscript, because we have been praying about and thinking about leveling up. And what that means is more conferences, bigger conferences. It means maybe if we have the resources, trying to get some traffic to come to the website. We already have a lot of traffic, but having more would be good. It means maybe hiring someone part-time if the resources are there for that. It means maybe adding an additional podcast. There's a lot of things we're talking about. It means getting the church app finder done, which it's just about done. So I would just ask you all out there to pray for the direction of Truthscript, because we want to be in our lane too. We want to glorify God. We don't want to run in vain. And we're convinced that this is the right thing, that this is bearing fruit and this will bear more fruit. And I think what we're doing is fairly unique. It's not something that I see other ministries replicating. And so the direction of the ministry is also important. We're putting out content that, like I said, how many places are you going to see an article on the Greater Idaho thing that's tailored for Christians so they understand this issue? Not many, but it's so important to understand these kinds of things. And so anyway, we're doing a lot, and I appreciate everyone's support and everyone's prayers. God bless you. Have a wonderful week. Bye now.